Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist depression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to the Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM. That's frequency. And my name is Andy. I am with you for the next hour. Of course, as always, acknowledging that we're broadcasting on Aboriginal land here, Jagger and Turrbal people in Brisbane and other nations elsewhere. And today I'm very excited to tell you what's on the show. We are going to be exploring the past and present of the bunya nut, one of the very best bush tucker native foods grown in Australia, and it is bunya nut season at the moment. They are in abundance. These giant spiky cones that fall from giant spiky trees, and you cut them open and you get out these fleshy nuts, starchy kind of nuts. So it tastes a bit like a chestnut, which we don't eat much in Australia, chestnuts, so it's very exciting. There's been plenty of them around. I've been eating them, and I know that they play a very significant part in the Aboriginal culture and traditions of this part of the world, southeast Queensland, and so I thought, let's investigate this and learn a bit about the significance of this nut that we are eating. And so I spoke with BJ Murphy, who's a Jinibara man. I spoke with Diane Jackie Widjung, who is a Kabi elder, and I also spoke with Ray Kerkhove, who's a historian who's written a lot about the Bunya gatherings, these massive events that used to take place when you had a bumper crop of bunya nuts, and it's really interesting to learn about all of that. So stick around. Hopefully by the end you'll be converted and you'll be heading out to try to find some bunya nuts yourself. And we do get a few cooking tips as well. And so I've got quite a lot we're going to pack in, so I'm going to get straight into it. We might start off with BJ to hear a bit about bunya nuts from him. Could you start by introducing yourself?
Yes, my name's BJ Murphy. I'm a Jinibara elder. I live up here on Jinibara country at Maleny in the Sunshine Coast hinterland.
Now, today on the Paradigm Shift, we are talking about bunya nuts, and their Jinibara country is definitely bunya country. And in fact, I saw on Facebook a picture of you with definitely the biggest haul of bunya nuts that I've seen this season. Can you tell us about what do bunya nuts mean for you?
Oh, for me, they're something that our people have walked hundreds and hundreds of miles for back in the day for our bunya nut gatherings, and they're just really, even though we eat them, they're just so sacred to me. Like, I just see them as such a symbolic significance for our people.
And that it is an incredible haul that you got there, and it does seem that you've been giving them away to people coming in, getting them. Is there a kind of sacredness to that idea of sharing them, harvesting them, eating them?
Yeah, absolutely. Normally back in the day, I believe 1902 was the last documented bunya gathering. Since then, Arnie Beverly Hand was holding the Bunya Dreaming Festival to keep it going, but due to COVID, sadly, that we haven't been able to do it. But we're working on bringing it back up here to Maroon Pocket, and we put it out because of COVID. I thought, it's a bump crop. They're just in abundance at the moment, and it'd be really sad to see them go to waste. And I put a post out on Facebook asking if anybody had, an excessive amount that they couldn't eat, or whether they didn't eat them at all. And, because there's lots of farms and stuff up here that still have bunya trees on their property. And we've got a few calls, and people have been dropping them off. And one lady, one couple in particular, they said, look, we've got 40 cones. Is that too many? I said, look, there's no such thing as too many bunya cones. And then she rang me back an hour later, and she said, look, I'm glad you said there's no such thing as too many, because we've got 270 cones here. And that's the image and the little video we put out to let people know that we had, this many, and that we really wanted to share them. And they brought them in a little tip truck and tipped them out here on our little dance circle at Muddenbajar. And we've just been doing what we can, because we're not funded or anything. It's just off our own backs, and working with community to, instead of us meeting a gathering due to COVID, getting these bunya nuts out to communities and out to mob to share and celebrate. They're just so culturally significant to us, and we look forward to them all year round.
Yeah, I'm interested. I've been eating a lot of them this year as well. There seems to be a lot around, and there's a lot of fun in, pulling apart the cones and things like that. And it's really, you can feel being part of a tradition of this area as well when you do this. That's been done for so long. But I'm wondering, do you think that bunya nuts could be part of a kind of Australian food growing, a bigger part of our diet, and maybe a commercially grown crop or something like that?
Well, yes and no. Absolutely, they could be commercially grown and, very much a staple food source. We shuck them, and, whether they're in the fire roasted or, cooked in the oven. I prefer mine boiled and just a bit of salt on them. And then I had a lady come in and said she steamed them, and it's through that process, I think, that's really important in sitting down with mob and community, and the yarns that come about whilst you're, I guess, for the better use of the term, processing the bunya nuts, shucking them and pulling the nuts out of the cones themselves. I think that's very important, that process, because that's when you're sharing and you're open and you're learning stuff from whoever's sitting with you and vice versa. I think, because we can get caught up in this, extractive society, my heart isn't in it for them to be, farmed for the nuts. I think it's better to keep them as that traditional way of practice. Though we are working with Sunshine Coast University to see, what levels of protein and what levels of carbohydrates are in them. You see them online for sale, and, for us personally, we could never bring ourselves to sell the cones. It's just wrong way business. We couldn't do it that way. So, but in saying that, there are some people that feel, I can only talk for myself and my wife, how we feel, but, there are some people that, could farm it and make it a staple food source in society.
Yeah, well, a big part of that, the gathering tradition, was that they were shared around, between all the different nations that came together, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the general saying is roughly, up to 500 kilometres, though I think it was a bit further. People travelled to Baroon Pocket, to sit down and celebrate those ceremonies and, marriages and squirrels and trade and all that sort of stuff. And, that was all because of and around the bunya nuts.
I'll tell you one thing that I am amazed about, because I love eating them and I love harvesting them, but climbing the trees or even getting the cones barefoot like those old Aboriginal people would have been, they're pretty spiky, hey? What do you think of it? They must have been pretty tough when they really loved those nuts, hey?
Yeah, look, something that, isn't done anymore that, we're working on getting back is our traditional fire farming, and burning the land and healing this country, because it is really sick. But, most of the time when I walk the bush, I'm not going to lie, I'm barefoot, and I couldn't count how many times I've been spiked by them leaves. But another thing we also used to do in gathering those cones was actually we'd trim the lower branches of the bunya tree so that all the sap goes up the top, and you get a nice big beautiful sap filled bunya cone. They're much nicer. So a lot of the trees now you see around, they've still got all these lower branches and stuff. So down here on the Stanley River, we'd use lawyer cane and we'd loop it around the tree and down around our foot, and we'd use those old branches where they've been cut off. They're like little steps, and you'd hook the top loop around and pull yourself up and climb up all the way up the top.
Now, there is an exhibition coming up there at Mullaney based on the bunya nuts. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so on the 5th of February, I'm pretty sure the date is, we're having a bunya living culture exhibition. I think it's just really important to bring the awareness about the community, in regards to the significance of the bunya trees, and how old some of them are, though a lot of them on Jinibara country have been logged. There's only a few that are those original big grandmother trees that we call grandmother, that helped build the forest, and the exhibition's just about how alive it still is. It's not forgotten, it's not gone, it's still very much alive, and having these gatherings and sitting down with mob and shucking the cones and eating them together, it's still very much a part of our living culture, and we try to participate in it every day up here.
All right. Thanks very much, BJ, and hope you're enjoying the abundant harvest of bunya nuts you've got there.
Yeah, thank you. And for those who don't have any, please do come in and grab some and, take them home and sit down and share them with your family and enjoy a good yarn over them.
Yeah, cheers, BJ.
Thanks, mate.
We are talking bunya nuts, the spiky yet ultimately delicious bush tucker that is abundant at the moment. Of course, every 3 years, according to the tradition, there's a bumper crop, and that's when the big bunya gatherings would take place. It does seem like this year may be a bumper crop. There's plenty of them around. I was speaking with BJ Murphy, he's a Jinibara man. He's been getting into the bunya nuts as well. And I'm going to chat now with Diane Jackie Widjung. She's a Kabi elder. This time last year, actually, I was eating bunya nuts with her up at the Jackie Kundu protest camp up at Gympie. So it's been moved on now, but Diane's still going there, fighting the good fight, and I thought I'd chat with her about bunya nuts.
I'm Diane Jackie Widjung. I'm the Keeper of Records for the Sovereign Native Tribes of the Kabi First Nation.
Now, Kabi people are in the Sunshine Coast area of Queensland, as we call it now, and this is one of the home territories of the bunya nut, which we're talking about today on 4ZZZ. And I actually ate bunya nuts with you a year ago up at the Jackie Kundu camp. You had a number of them there and you were cooking them. What's the significance for bunya nuts for Kabi people?
Well, this is Bunya country. Bunya is actually, in Kabi language, it's bunyi or bunya. And the bunyas grow on Kabi country. And this is where all the modern bunya trees emanated from, this area, around Gympie, the Blackall Ranges, and up further north. There's actually a large stand of bunya trees at Warrabinda, and the tribes up there regard themselves as Kabi speaking tribes. So this whole area is bunya country, Kabi country, Waka country, and the surrounding tribes as well. But most of the bunya gatherings were held on Kabi and Waka country.
And You were harvesting quite a lot of them last year, and it was something that when guests came to the camp that we were breaking open the nuts together and eating them. Do you feel like there's that ritual of harvesting and eating the nuts is still something that's of continuing importance for Kabi?
Oh, of course, because the law meetings were heard at the time of the Bunya harvest, because Bunya was one of the main foods around here, and unfortunately since colonisation a lot of the Bunya trees have been cut down, and sharing the Bunya was a good way of getting people together, because the law meetings were really important, but so many people used to come to this area for Bunya gatherings. They needed a lot of food, so the time of the Bunya was a good time to have very large gatherings, and people came here from all over the continent and the islands, followed their songlines to gather at the time of the Bunya harvest. So that's something that's been around since the beginning of time, and it's not something that will disappear as long as Kabi or Waka Waka or any of the other Bunya tribes are around. But unfortunately, there's less and less trees. In 1842, there was a proclamation made on behalf of Queen Victoria that this land was not to be settled, and the Bunya trees other trees were not to be cut down. It noted that Bunya was important and it sustained people. But unfortunately, since that proclamation was made in 1842, successive governments have ignored it, and people have been cutting down the trees. So there are less and less viable Bunya trees, and a case in point was when the Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads removed Kabi people from the sacred site of Djaki Kundu and knocked down well over 50 mature Bunya trees.
Do you think that we could be doing more with them? Like, Bruce Pascoe and people have talked about farming native foods. Do you think that we could farm Bunya nuts and sell them, export them overseas?
Well, I think the Australian government acknowledges that all tribal people should be self-determining. Why not allow tribal people to create some sort of industry? Because Bunya nuts were owned, the trees were owned by specific families and still are. The areas that they grew in were owned by tribal people, and that's all been taken away because, in effect, government doesn't allow tribal people to harvest nuts anymore. A lot of places the trees have been cut down. Where trees still remain, anyone can go in and take the nuts and do with them what they like. In fact, a lot of people harvest them and sell them, so there's less and less for the tribes every year. So it's disappointing, and Kabi people have been actively planting more Bunya trees. We plant the nuts on Kabi country. Whitbooker has been cultivating Bunya trees quite extensively for a while and handing them out to other tribal peoples to grow. And I really think that this should be encouraged because Bunya trees do provide a really nutritious resource. And I think that if tribal people were allowed to set up that industry on their own without government interference, it would employ a lot of people, and as well, it would be making tribal culture stronger.
Now, there's different ways that you can cook and prepare the nuts. What's your preferred method of cooking the Bunya nuts?
Oh, well, yeah, everyone has different methods. I have to say that boiled with lots of salt is my favourite. I used to like them raw until Whitbooker cooked them up for all of us, and the way he cooks them, they're just wonderful. And I think that's the favourite way for most people. But people do stir-fry them and make soup and curries and pestos and all sorts of other things. So it's, personal preference, I guess.
Okay, thanks, Diane.
Thank you. You're welcome. Bona Whoopin.
That is Diane Jackie Woodjung there, talking about bunya nuts. I did think I'll just put in, so late last year, they did get evicted from the Jackie Kundu camp by police, and we did report that on the Paradigm Shift. If you're listening, it's been quite upsetting for them having a lot of that site there at Jackie Kundu cleared, but they are in court fighting that, and so they'll be pleading not guilty to the charges there of refusing to leave their own land, and that's ongoing in court. You're on the Paradigm Shift. I was reading about the history of bunya gatherings, and I did read that a lot of them, they would make a kind of bread out of the bunya nuts. You'd mash it and then you cook it on the fire, and you would mix in porcupine meat, as they call it, echidna meat, into the bunya bread to eat it, which is just another way of eating this great bush tucker. There's lots of different ways, and Aboriginal people had ways of preserving it and fermenting it, sprouting all kinds of things. Now, a lot of that history I learnt from a paper written by Ray Kerkhove about bunya gatherings in southeast Queensland, and so I thought, who better to get on the show than Ray to have a chat about the bunya gatherings. Could you start off by introducing yourself?
Yes, I'm Dr. Ray Kerkhove. I'm a professional historian. I've worked with Indigenous sort of projects for probably 30-odd years. And I've, over the years, been on and off quite involved with the Bunya Festival. Most recently with Macquarie University, there's a project that they're having at the moment, which is involving Indigenous and non-Indigenous doctoral students.
And are you a fan of eating the bunya nut?
When I can get it. When I lived up the coast, that was a bit easier. They used to sort of sometimes be in the grocery shops.
Well, they are very abundant at the moment. And in your context as a historian, you have studied the bunya gatherings, which is one of the very interesting things about this nut. What started your interest in that?
Yes, well, at the time I was living up the coast, and it's one of the features of what's now the Sunshine Coast was the hinterland. I'll give you a bit of a story. When I was a teenager, I was helping with these church camps, and some of the participants, some of the teachers, took us up the range, and it was like a really misty day. And there were these enormous cannonball-shaped cones lying about, and they said, well, these things you can eat. And they didn't even know how to eat them, so they tried hacking at them with axes and things. It was most bizarre. And that fascinated me. I thought, what the heck are these? They're like dinosaur heads, you know? And then I learned about them, and subsequent to that, I was part of a thing called Renewing the Dreaming, which was led by Ted Gabu Thomas. He was an Aboriginal elder from South Coast of New South Wales, and he had his camps which were about sort of enculturating white people into Indigenous ways, and he had them actually up at the Bunya Mountains. So from then I was sold, and I became quite involved with all that.
So there is a paper that you've written that is available online that compiles some of the primary source material talking about the Aboriginal bunya gatherings from when they are still happening, both in the Bunya Mountains and also on the Sunshine Coast hinterland. What inspired this paper?
Yes, that was actually a fundraiser, and that's sort of a bit of an indication of my involvement over the years. There's a Kabi elder, her name's Beverly Han, and for quite a few years now, it must be over a decade now, she's been running her own bunya festival. Originally she had it at Broome Pocket at the dam there, and then moved it to a few other spots. It might actually be coming back there by now, I don't know. It's on shortly. And so I did that as a fundraiser for their efforts. They were trying to keep it going, and it was actually quite a big thing at the time.
Okay, so let's talk about the bunya gatherings and why this is an important bit of history. And what many people would know is that these gatherings, a lot of different nations came together as a bit of a meeting and also a bit of a pilgrimage.
Yes, that's right. And it's interesting because the more Indigenous groups I talk to and also the more research I do, the more I find it's even further and further afield than I thought. We used to think, sort of like, well, say southeast Queensland and a bit of the southwest. Although even since the 70s, there's been some doctoral work done on this that shows it was also all the way down to like Dubbo. But then I recently dug up an account of people coming all the way from Birdsville. This is in about the 1870s. They're walking all the way from there, but also like from what we now call like Tambo, the Central Highlands, Bundaberg, all the way down to say Coffs Harbour. So it's a huge chunk of Australia, and it may have been the biggest Indigenous festival or gathering that Australia ever saw. There's some numbers. Some people say there was something 7,000. There's Archibald Mesden even talks about 20,000. Enormous amount of people from an enormous amount of groups, made that, and it would take them months to get there even.
And your research says that there was a lot of priority given to making it to the Bunya gathering. Even Aboriginal people who had jobs, say on cattle stations, would go walkabout, say, I've got to go to the Bunya gathering.
Yes, yeah. Because it was sort of everything rolled up into one. If you can imagine something that was like Parliament, the National Eisteddfod, the Olympics, the biggest trade fair you can imagine. Imagine all those things happening all at once in one spot. You could see how tremendously important it was. People would be back in their homeland. They would be preparing for this. They'd develop songs and dances that they wanted to show off once they got there. They'd be making crafts and things that they would be selling, or rather trading up when they got there. Some of those marriages were arranged. Often all the sort of sorting out of political differences and so on was done, because the idea was you'd come there and it was like an armistice. It was peace, and then the end of it was also peace. They'd sort everything out, and then everyone would kind of leave with everything sorted. So it's a great thing to have that goal, I think. And it would have been sort of like Christmas and a lot of our festivals all rolled together. And I've got an account where there were women coming they'd walked vast distance from the west, and they could then see the Bunya Mountains on the horizon, and they were so ecstatic. They would just start dancing, and they even pulled these little white kids who were hiding in a tent, fearing for their lives, and they grabbed them and brought them out and danced around with them, and then gave them all bunya nuts. So people would have been ecstatic whenever they turned up to these places. It would have been quite something to experience, I think.
And the way that they gathered is really interesting too. I mean, there would have been some kind of oral messengers sent out, but also a system of smoke signals to tell people that the festival was coming up.
Yeah, I recently did a paper about the whole complexity of Aboriginal communications. I had a very sophisticated network, but it was especially used for things like these, for these gatherings. There would be sort of there were set spots from which you signalled, and you can actually send a signal hundreds of kilometres if you've got the right spots, and if people are knowing to watch for a signal coming from that spot. And this is how the whole thing was coordinated. They said that people would turn up basically at the same time, coming from these vast distances. And you can imagine, like, people are just walking. They wouldn't often they wouldn't eat much. They would even sometimes sleep in the open because they were just so eager to go there. It was a whole, like I said, a pilgrimage. It was a whole thing about just making the journey, I think, and then it wasn't just the Bunya Mountains or the Blackall Ranges, it was the whole area around there too. There were a lot of bunya groves all through there, and they would, although there were key areas there, they would move it depending on where the crop was better, or where they could fit people. So if you can imagine thousands of people spread out over that whole area, you can kind of see how it may have worked.
Okay, so let's talk about what would happen at the Bunya gathering. It would start off with a kind of welcoming ceremony.
Yes, yeah, we've got some accounts from in Petrie where there'd be someone would go up a tree and bring down the first cone. It would have to be the traditional owners of that area, but they had basically, there was also a song they sang which actually welcomed everyone in, and basically said you were friends and so on, And that was one of the key things, was basically like a picnic, if you can imagine, because there's these trees, if you see them, if you can imagine there being many, many more of them, and huge forests everywhere of them, and they each have something like 60 cones, and each cone has, can have like 100 nuts, so it's a lot of food. So there was a lot of feasting, and then all this other stuff worked into that, like, tournaments and trade and storytelling at night, and they'd visit each other. There were so many activities. We've got a lot of descriptions of different sports and things that were done, like a lot of competitive sports. So it would have been a bit of everything.
There's reports of Aboriginal people gorging themselves on bunya nuts so much that they couldn't walk.
Yes. Yeah, we don't know how accurate that is, but it does seem like because they were basically spending most of the time walking, getting there, they'd often be quite thin by the time they got there. And then because it was so much feasting and that, it wasn't just nuts, there were other things around, like that's the peak season for shrub turkey eggs, so any scrub turkeys eggs would be eaten along with that, and whatever other game, but it was mainly the nuts, and they got quite sleek and from all that. They also, and this is something too I've just been working on, because I'm doing lately a lot of work about storage. I'm finding a lot of accounts that large quantities of nuts were actually buried by creeks, and we found there were different ways they used special mud to preserve these. They put them in these huge dillies, huge sort of like baskets, if you like, and that was like a winter food throughout a very large area. I've been surprised how many accounts I found of this. So it seems that this was done at springs and at creeks, and I think some of these sprouted, and that's why they turn up at where there were camps. But this is something we're looking at too, is like, well, how much were bunya trees deliberately dispersed? How much were they actually, did they spread with people, going back to their homeland, sort of thing?
I imagine a lot of the time it would have been quite a lot of work for Aboriginal people to get their food, either catching game or milling grass seeds. And then you have bunya nuts, which, there's so many of them, and they're high carbohydrates, which a lot of their food wouldn't have been. You can see why it made sense to use this as an opportunity to get everybody together.
Yes, there was such a surplus. There's still parts, if you go to the Bunya Mountains, there's still areas where you can look out and you're looking at like whole valleys of these trees. Now, imagine that this was also the case sort of around what's now Kilcoy and Jimna, and out to... there's barely any left on the Blackwell Ranges, and there used to be tons there. So if you imagine all those areas having huge stands of this, it would have been a tremendous amount of food.
And it's always good to discuss your differences on a full stomach. And so this was a part of the bunya gathering as well, wasn't it? This kind of resolving of disputes between different tribes.
Yeah, we have a number of accounts of... this was also like where some of the very interesting... I do a lot of stuff about frontier wars, and it seems like a lot of group decisions were made. There'd be discussions, and then further discussions. It went on and on. There'd be like rings that they had. They're called tours, where they'd invite different main elders, from different groups representing different groups, and then there might be a subsequent meeting and so on and so on. There was always a lot of discussion, but then they worked out sort of like what to do about the problem of the invasion, basically, the fact that the settlers were coming here. So there's quite a bit we have on that, and that a lot of the actions were sort of decided up there. You can imagine, because if you've got people coming from such huge area, there would be a lot to talk about in terms of like, well, what's happening generally in the broader world instead of just within our own group. And that seems to be a lot of what happened there. Also, there would be grievances that happened over time, and they used the gathering as a way of sorting some of this so that everybody left on a good note. And that was often done with tournaments, which are sort of like, I suppose you'd call them like ritualised battles, but rarely did anyone get killed in them. Or that happened sometimes, but not usually. That was mainly a lot of venting and carrying on, and a show of force where one side, a bit like a football match, where one side would try to drive the other off the field, and if they drove the other off the field, then they won, and that was where you use your weaponry and so on. And the idea was to sort of not be, you'd have to sort of stand your ground and deflect whatever spears are coming your way, or to sort of without jumping out of the way. So there was a lot of artistry in this, and it would have been, from what I've read, it must have been fantastic to watch. People came to just watch these things, but that's how a lot of the differences were sorted.
Yeah, it's an interesting part of your paper that Aboriginal people had told white people or told each other of these stories of great battles, that they had fought. But then when they went and watched these fights firsthand, they were a sort of like theatre. Yeah,
that was the point I made, because you see, you read in a lot of accounts, they say, such a tribe, they annihilated the other tribe, but actually what they meant is just like we say in a footy match, we slaughtered them, but that doesn't mean anyone was dead on the field. And yeah, that's the interesting thing, because a lot of whites heard that and thought, oh my goodness, they've wiped out an entire nation. But then when they attended them, they could see what was really going on, which was more just the fact that they won the match, sort of thing. Having said that, there were accounts. I mean, it depended on how furious a grievance you had. I mean, I'm not going to make it light and say that they never had any ongoing feuds, but it's just generally it wasn't like that.
Yeah, on that political theme as well, in the stories of the frontier wars that happen in this part of the country, the Bunya gathering is also a significant place there. For instance, in the story of the Kilcoy massacre.
Yeah, I've written a bit about that, and so has Libby Connors in Warrior, the book on Dundalli. And in fact, what I found exciting was I actually found an account from Olga Miller, who was a bachelor elder, and she was recalling how her, I think it was her grandfather, told a story about how he, as a boy, had gone with his grandfather to actually attend one of these meetings that they had to decide, well, what do we do about the white people? You got to remember that Aboriginal groups, they're always part of a larger group. There's a Kimberley elder. She explained this to me once. She said, "Look, Ray, it's not like little nations. They're actually part of a gigantic net, and so you'd have your local identity, but then you'd be part of something bigger, and then they'd be part of some alliance with other groups, and so on. It went, And so this would be useful when there's an invasion that's affecting everybody, because then you might put your differences aside and then start to do things together. And we have occasions of that. Something like 14 of the main groups, if you want, language groups, some people call it, or tribes of the whole, which would be sort of like from central Queensland all the way down to North New South Wales. They all declared war on the whites following the Kilcoy massacre. Once they saw the massacre was reenacted for them, and everybody got really annoyed and said, well, that's it, we're acting against this. So you can imagine a sort of coordinated activity across that huge area. And there's repeated accounts in the newspapers of the time of the Bunya Mountains being used as this sort of place where people would meet up and discuss what to do, and then go out and do it. So that would have been really important, because you need to actually meet face to face for all this. I mean, that they did also relay messages by message stick and so on, and so things could still be coordinated from afar. But a lot of it was the face to face meetings, and that's also why you find a lot of accounts of the native police being instructed to break up big gatherings like that, particularly in the Bunya Mountains. They did a lot of that. They did a lot of breaking up big gatherings because they knew that was used to hatch plots against whites.
So on a bit of a lighter note, the Bunya gatherings also had sports and games, and also the corroborees, which were sort of like concerts.
Yeah. The interesting... I'll talk about the concert thing first, and then the sport thing. We have accounts that they would often, people would always bring a new dance. Each time they came again to the Bunya Mountains, they'd have a new dance, a new song, and it was very much like the Stedford in the sense that you tried to have the most popular one, and if that was sort of the hit, then that would actually go around the whole group, and then they'd bring it back to their homeland. And there's a number of early anthropologists who record some of these songs being sung in very distant lands, and nobody actually knew what the songs meant because they were not in their own language, but they knew the song off by heart. So these things would travel like a hit, like a modern song back to these places. In terms of the sports, there were a lot of different things mentioned. There were like wrestling matches. There was something like I suppose you'd call it competitive boomerang throwing, where they do concentric circles with a pole in the middle, and you try to get your boomerang closest to the middle pole. So they had other running and tree climbing contests. There was something like a bit like bowls, where they used cobble stones, like little boulders, and they'd a bit like lawn bowls. So there was a lot of things. So you can imagine it would have been a very entertaining time to be up there.
And of course, a bit of romance as well. There were sort of marriage and courtship rituals that happened at the gathering.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. I found one account which I found very amusing, and it basically talks about how, people wouldn't be married on the mountains themselves, and many of the elders have told me that. You might have things arranged, but you'd have to get married down the mountain. I should explain that, like, the mountains themselves were fairly sacred, so often people didn't spend a lot of time there. They would go up there through the day, and they tend to camp below. Not always. Some say that they were camped up there, but generally everything that's sacrosanct you keep sort of clean, if you like. And so there'd be ceremonial grounds and camps that were sort of below. It seemed, from what I could work out, there were the camps, and then beyond them, a little bit further out, there were the ceremonial grounds. Well, so there's this one account I found which was really interesting, that said that when people would get married, the bride and groom would be sent each up. They'd have to climb a bunya tree by themselves. The groom would cry out to the bride, why he wanted her, what he thought was great about her, and she'd rebuff him and just ridicule him, and they'd have this ongoing sort of basically argument, and people would be supporting them from down below. They'd cry out, support and so on, and they'd work out from their interchange if they were suitable for each other, so that if they kind of could argue well and cop all the flack, then they'd come down and they'd be married. So a very interesting use of bunya trees to think of that.
I find all the accounts of Aboriginal people climbing the trees quite interesting, because I love bunya nuts, but I pick them up off the ground. I'm not climbing up that spiky thing, but it seems like they did all the time. Yeah, that's the interesting thing. And, they had like a hoop sort of that they put around their body and around the tree. There were different ways. I mean, there's some accounts say that there were like steps cut in, but a lot of the accounts I've read said that no one would ever dare touch a bunya tree, or that sometimes it was a group that came from somewhere else, and then they'd actually get in trouble for cutting the tree like that. So we're not quite sure what went on there. The other thing that's interesting too, and this is something I just found recently, is that a lot of the trees they'd remove the lower branches of in order to make the nuts, have more nuts and so on. So there was a sort of like a farming of the trees, which you think that'd be actually quite a bit of effort to go around all those trees and do that. But apparently that was done. Well, thanks very much, Ray. And I've got to say, you've gone to a lot of effort to compile this history. And so I wonder if you can tell us, why do you think it's important to record this?
Well, obviously, it's... in terms of things that are distinctly Australian, we really don't have much to go on in terms of our colonial history. It's a very thin layer, whereas there's a lot of fascinating, rich material from Indigenous societies, and you've got to think about it. This wasn't only just for Indigenous societies, because a lot of the colonial societies were heavily involved in this. They were often participants in the bunya gatherings. They were often assisted them. It was part of just what you did when you were up there. I really think it's important in terms of like our identity, what's meaningful. It's also just a bit of an example. It's something like a real Australian Christmas in a way, the way the event was, an example of how different peoples can get on, like all the different groups that went there. And I still, even today, if I go up to the Blackall Ranges or up to the Bunya Mountains, it does feel intoxicating in a way. I think from all those thousands and thousands of people going up there over thousands of years, you can still feel the joy. So these are really special areas, and I think it's something almost like something deeply spiritual that white Australians, as much as, well, certainly, obviously, it's already ingrained for all the groups I talk with, but, it's something that we can come away with that's a bit deeper than the usual daily run of things.
Okay, thanks very much, Ray.
Thank you.
That is historian Ray Kerkhove. He does a great job recording a lot of Aboriginal history, and yes, talking about bunya nuts there, bunya gatherings, and I really do agree with him that at this time of year, trying to find the cones, cracking them open together with people and cooking them up and then sharing them with people, the joy of this food that's native to this area, that all of this is a really wonderful cultural thing and a way of being in tune with the traditions of this place going back thousands and thousands of years. And as Ray said there, the bunya gatherings would have been quite an event to be a part of. So that's about it for the Paradigm Shift for this week. I'm actually going to go and eat some bunya nuts now. I've pre-prepared some already for lunch. But I will leave you with one last one. I hope you can go and find some of your own wherever you can find the bunya trees, and they do stand out. They're quite distinctive looking trees. It's worth looking underneath. The cones drop around this time of year in this part of the country and up at the Bunya Mountains a bit later. And I'll see you next week.